When the Hunger Games movie came out, I decided to do something kind of weird for me, which is go into something really big knowing almost nothing about it. Usually I like to read the book, or at least read up on the book, kind of have a sense of what it's about going into it. For whatever reason, for the Hunger Games, I decided, you know what, let's just go into the movie completely ignorant of the source material. I just went into it knowing nothing about it. Then I posted my thoughts on YouTube. Now, I've read the book, so this is going to be a book, just a general book review, mixed with some thoughts I have, on how it compares to the movie. I think one of the most notable differences between the book and the movie is the way that the world is introduced and the way it's set up. A very common challenge with science fiction and fantasy stories is trying to figure out a way to explain everything. Usually there's a lot of backstory, or there's a lot of, you have to explain what the rules of the world are, and how do you explain all that without just stopping the story, putting the whole story on pause and say, okay, the audience has to do their homework. Okay, now we can get on with the story. Generally, you want it to kind of just sort of come out in the story rather than just stopping the story. So what impressed me, I think, about the beginning of the Hunger Games book is the way Collins does this, but it works. He really does just sort of put the story on pause and tell you, here's the Hunger Games, here's the reaping. Now let's get back to the story, but it's all really interesting. I think it works because for several pages, I don't remember exactly how long, but for a while there, it's just the characters talking about the Hunger Games, talking about the reaping, but we don't really know anything about it. They seem to be talking about it with dread, so that kind of makes it intriguing, but we don't really have a lot of details. The way they talk about the reaping, I think, is especially interesting because they talk about dressing up for it, and it's sort of a really important occasion, but also one they're sort of dreading. So it's like, okay, I'm wanting to know more. I want to know what they're talking about. So when Collins finally gets us to that part where, okay, we're going to stop the story and I'm going to explain everything to you, rather than feeling like, oh boy, I better read up on this because it's going to be important, my feeling is instead is, oh gosh, finally we're getting answers. And she doesn't even give them all to you initially. She gives you a little bit, then she goes back to the story, then she gives you a little bit more, then goes back to the story. And so by the time she's done explaining everything, I'm kind of leaning in. And so the story's barely even started, and I'm already invested. I'm already interested in what's going on. The movie, by contrast, gives the whole thing away right from the beginning. There's a little title card at the beginning that just it explains what the reaping is, explains what the Hunger Games is. I feel like I could probably do an entire video just about Katniss. I found her to be a much more interesting, much more sympathetic character in the book than in the movie. She's just hopelessly practical. If she can't clearly see a use for something right away, she just kind of disregards it. And probably the best example of this is when Rue tells her that she likes music, and Katniss can't relate to it at all. It's like, what use is music? And it's not hard to see how Katniss got this way. She's grown up, as she calls in the book, scraping by. Every meal she eats, it might be her last. So I think Katniss she just doesn't have time for anything that isn't going to put food in her stomach. After her father died, she's kind of stepped into his role, providing food. But also, she's having to provide the emotional support as well. After the death of the father, it just seems like the mother was not very supportive. So Katniss kind of has to be the emotionally strong one too. So she has a lot on her shoulders. She's been forced to grow up very quickly. The most interesting part about Katniss, I think, is just trying to figure out who's the real Katniss. Because she's almost always having to put on some kind of mask. She can't really show you who she really is. Because the family depends on her for, emotional support to sort of keep some sanity in the family. And that's what makes Gale such an important character. I love the part of the book where it talks about how when she's around Gale, her face muscles relax and she feels like she can just be herself. She doesn't have to perform anymore. She doesn't have to pretend like, everything's okay, everything's fine, and just be strong. She can just be herself. It's interesting seeing how all of that translates to when she's in the games. Because really the games are just Katniss's life, only exaggerated. It's Katniss, during the games, Katniss has to focus on, okay, how am I going to survive today? How am I going to get the next meal? That's all she can focus on. Well, Katniss is already used to doing that. That's her life. And also, during the games, she's having to put on a performance. She's having to do everything. She's very conscious of the fact that I might be on camera right now. People are watching. I need to attract sponsors if I'm going to survive. And this whole what something really is versus what it's presented to be is that's kind of the essential theme of the book, I think. Obviously, Katniss is having to do it to her family. She's having to do it throughout the games, and it extends even further where she has to pretend she likes Peeta. And also the game itself. The Hunger Games is a brutal, futuristic Roman Colosseum. It's a horrible, horrible thing where children are killed, but it's presented as a game show. One of the main things that just comes across so much better in the book than the movie is this tension between all the tributes, especially Peeta and Katniss. training together, but knowing, well, I guess we're going to have to kill each other at some point, and kind of not wanting to think about it. I love the bit of the book where Katniss is trying to figure out what Peeta's motives are. Why is he doing this? What possible strategy could he have? And after, a page or two of her thinking about all these different possibilities, finally, the possibility that seems to her the most unlikely, the most crazy, it finally comes to her. Maybe Peeta is just being nice. And I love how long it takes her to even consider that. I think it really says something about Katniss as a character and the kind of life she's lived in District 12. One of the little things that's interesting looking back on my movie review is I was confused by Katniss's relationship with Cinna, or lack thereof, really. In the movie, just as she's about to enter the arena, you just sort of feel like they have a bond there. And when I saw the movie, I was kind of like, where did this come from? And now it is perfectly clear that was just for fans of the book, because they do kind of have a meaningful relationship. In the book, he's kind of the one character who acknowledges what she's going through, that this is not American Idol. This really sucks. This is really hard what you're having to do. It's understandable that they kind of develop a bond in the book. The movie, look, if you're going to do it, then do it. Don't just all of a sudden shoehorn in a bond between these two characters you haven't earned. If you don't have time to develop it, then just don't do it at all. The most, I think, kind of intense parts of the book, the parts where I was really into it the most, are inevitably the parts that are the least cinematic. And that's really just basic survival stuff. Hunting for food, hunting for water. There's pages and pages and pages of her just trying to find water and slowly feeling her body just fall apart as she becomes dehydrated. That's all really compelling in a book where you can hear the character's thoughts. In a movie, you can only have someone walk around looking thirsty for so long before you start to feel like, okay, let's get on with it. I really liked how in the book, they never cut away from the games. Katniss is constantly having to wonder, what's Prim thinking right now? Where is Peeta right now? Are the cameras on me right now? Is this a chance to attract sponsors? She's always, she's very conscious of the fact that she's on camera. And, it never cuts away and actually shows what's going on. We're in Katniss's shoes. We know what she knows. The movie, on the other hand, it does cut away several times. It shows you what everyone is doing. It shows you perspectives. You see what Gale, what his reaction is to a lot of things. It shows Prim a couple times, I think. And it's just, you don't get the sense of claustrophobia you do in the book. And I wish the movie had been more disciplined about that. I think it would have allowed us to kind of get inside Katniss's headspace a little more. The end of the book just feels different from the movie in a lot of ways. My friend Carmen pointed out something about the berries scene. In the book, they actually put the berries in their mouths and they're about to swallow, and then they get interrupted. And again, this is one of the things that results from being able to hear a character's thoughts in a book. We know that Katniss fully intends to swallow those berries. In the movie, Katniss actually looks at Peeta and says, "Trust me," and so you get the sense that, in retrospect, you get the sense that, well, she was suspecting that they were going to interrupt, and she wasn't going to have to actually swallow the berries. And they never actually put the berries in their mouths; they just have them in their hands. In the book, you really get the sense they're serious. They're going to commit suicide. That they're totally okay with doing that, rather than giving the Capitol the satisfaction of having a champion again. One of the main things I pointed out in my movie review, where I hadn't read the book, was I was just disappointed that the characters finally, after coming on that journey, finally stand up to the Capitol and say, no, we're not going to play your game. We'd rather commit suicide. Finally, they stand up to them. And then in the very next scene, there they are, walking the red carpet and just totally going along with it. Now, in the book, that's essentially true, but it's just one of those things where you can hear the characters' thoughts, you can get their reasoning a lot more clearly, rather than just kind of having to assume it. So Katniss does essentially the same thing, but she's a lot more sympathetic. It was interesting, this idea that, there could be cameras anywhere, or there could be hidden microphones throughout the Capitol, so she really can't tell Peeta, what she's thinking. So I guess it's kind of understandable that Peeta thought she was serious about them being a couple. At the moment I found that out, that was a big surprise for me. I really didn't have a lot of sympathy for him initially. I've thought it through since, and I guess it kind of makes sense. I think in the movie, it's pretty ambiguous. What did Katniss actually kind of like Peeta? Was it all an act? I just think in the movie in general, and you see this in my movie review where I hadn't read the book. I always felt like I was missing something. I always felt like, wait a minute, like what's Peeta's motivation? What's Katniss's motivation? Like why is she doing this? I don't get it. Am I supposed to know something? And in the book, it's perfectly clear. Like Peeta's motivation, just like the book, is a mystery for most of the movie. But it didn't feel like that was intentional in the movie. I thought like, wait, I'm missing something. In the book, you get it. No, you're supposed to be missing it. It's because it's a mystery. So overall thoughts on the Hunger Games book, I found it a very enjoyable read. I mean, honestly, even though I'd seen the movie and I knew, and I'd been told, yeah, the movie in the book, you know, in terms of the story, in terms of who lives and who dies and the major events, you know, it's basically the same. So I pretty much knew how it was going to end, but I still found myself getting caught up in it. You know, I still, when the characters' lives were at risk, I actually found myself getting really into it. All the themes of, you know, violence used as entertainment and something that's really horrible but being presented as something that's okay. I thought all of that just came through, it was a lot more developed and it came through a lot more powerfully in the book. So, great book, pretty good movie, fair adaptation.